My name is Edna Collins. I am 84 years old now. And I never told anyone what really happened the night my stepfather came into our room with a shotgun, yelling my name and dragging my little sister by the hair. I never told anyone how I stood between him and that gun, and made a decision that would haunt and free me for the rest of my life. He had already bruised her face so badly her left eye was swollen shut. She was only 9. I was 14. He screamed, "You think you can hide her from me, Edna? You think I don't know what y'all been saying?" That was when I saw it. He was going to kill her. And I couldn't let that happen. So I lunged at him with the only thing I had, my mother's rusted sewing scissors. He screamed, fell backward, bleeding from the side of his neck. But he didn't die. He didn't die. And that night, that was just the beginning of what would become a long, bloodied, and terrifying path to something I never imagined I'd ever crave: revenge. But before I tell you what I did in the years that followed, you need to know how it all began. When I was just 6 years old, Mama brought a man home. His name was Roy Lewis. He had slicked back hair, a crooked smile, and always reeked of cheap liquor and gasoline. At first, I thought he was just Mama's new friend. I didn't understand what remarry meant until I heard her practicing the word in front of the mirror. "Mrs. Roy Lewis," she whispered with pride, curling her hair with her fingers. "Mrs. Roy Lewis." I hated him from the beginning. My baby sister Rose was only a toddler back then. She didn't know anything about hate or fear yet. But I did. I remember the first time I saw him kick our dog. Sparky yelped and ran under the porch. Roy looked at me and said, "You tell anyone and I'll shut that little mouth of yours." From that moment on, I knew silence was survival. The abuse started slowly. Shove here. Slap there. Then came the nights. Mama worked the night shift at the mill to feed us, and that left me and Rose alone with him. He would come into our room drunk, angry, muttering about ungrateful little girls and disrespectful brats. Sometimes he'd grab Rose and shake her just because she spilled water on the floor. Sometimes he'd just sit in the dark by our door watching. I learned to stay awake, to keep my body in front of hers. I was just a child, but I felt like a mother. Every morning Mama would come home, and I'd smile like nothing happened. Because if I told her, Roy would punish us worse. And I didn't know if she'd believe me. Mama was tired. Always tired. Her eyes were hollow. She had dreams once, but Roy crushed them. I could see it in her face. But the night he raised that shotgun at my baby sister, that was the last straw. And yet, it wasn't over. That was just the night I realized. One day I would make him pay. But first, I needed to survive. And survival wasn't easy in that house. There was a day he locked us outside in the snow for 5 hours because we talked back. I had to wrap Rose in my sweater and sing to her through her shivers just to keep her awake. I was only 10. And still we told no one. Because no one wanted to believe little black girls in our neighborhood back then. Especially not about men who worked hard and paid the bills. But I was watching, waiting, learning how he thought. What made him paranoid? What made him weak? I started keeping notes in a tattered notebook, hidden behind a loose floorboard under my bed. What he drank, what he yelled, how long Mama was gone, when he forgot to lock the gun cabinet. It was the only power I had, and I clung to it like a secret weapon. I watched him spiral, lose jobs, come home angrier, slap Mama, curse the walls. And I started to think maybe I wasn't alone. Maybe I could find help. But when I tried to tell the church deacon, he told me to pray harder and respect the man of the house. That's when I knew. Revenge wouldn't come from adults. It would have to come from me. But what can a girl do when she's only a child, with no power, no voice? Well, what if I told you that same little girl grew up, never forgot a thing, and one day had the chance to destroy the man who destroyed her family? Would you want to know what she did next? Then keep listening. Because what happened after that shotgun night will break your heart and make you believe in justice in the most unexpected way. And it all started when Rose disappeared. If this story moved you even just a little, please like, comment, and subscribe. Chapter 2 will shake you even more. Justice is coming. And it's personal. I didn't sleep the night Rose disappeared. I waited on the porch, numb and barefoot in the cold, her doll clutched in my hand. The sun rose, and my baby sister was still gone. Mama had gone to work the night before. Roy said Rose had run away after she broke something. He told me to shut up and clean the mess. But I knew that was a lie. Rose wouldn't run, not without me. I searched the woods behind our house. Called her name till my throat bled. I checked the neighbor's barn. I knocked on every door down our dirt road. Everyone said, "I haven't seen her," and closed their doors quickly like we carried shame in our skin. I begged Roy to help me look. He lit a cigarette and said, "Little girls go missing every day." That was the moment something inside me cracked. Something I didn't know could break twice. I stared at him with a hollow I didn't understand yet. "I'm telling Mama," I whispered. He flicked the cigarette at my feet and grinned. "Go ahead. See if she believes you." And he was right. Mama came home and screamed when she realized Rose wasn't in her bed. But Roy stood there, calm, fake crying into his hands, saying he didn't know what happened, that she'd been acting strange lately. He said she was probably off sulking somewhere. Mama looked between us. Me, desperate, terrified, and Roy, smeared in manufactured grief. He chose him. She said maybe Rose really had run off. I locked myself in the bathroom and screamed into a towel so no one would hear me. That night I didn't sleep. I waited until Roy was snoring in his recliner, drunk and drooling with the TV still humming. Then I snuck out with my notebook and flashlight and went back into the woods. It was the smell that found her. Rose, buried in a shallow grave, covered in leaves and mud and a broken branch. She was cold, small, quiet. Her favorite dress ripped. Her tiny shoes gone. I dropped to my knees, holding her doll in one hand and the flashlight in the other. I didn't cry. Not then. I couldn't afford to. Because now I knew what Roy was. Not just a monster. Not just a drunk. He was a murderer. And I was going to make sure the whole world knew it. I ran back to the house, shaking and dirty, heart beating like a war drum. I didn't know who to trust, but I knew I needed evidence. I didn't touch her. I didn't move her. I wrote everything down. Location. What she was wearing. I made a sketch of the trees. I memorized everything. And then I did the scariest thing I'd ever done. I walked into that house and looked Roy in the eyes. He looked back at me like he could smell what I'd found. "You been out?" he slurred, sipping straight from the bottle. He nodded. "Don't matter," he muttered. "Ain't no one gonna believe you anyway." I nodded again and said nothing. 'Cause I knew, not yet. But one day, someone would believe me. And it started with that notebook. I wrapped it in plastic, buried it in the crawl space under our house, and marked the spot with a loose brick I painted white. It was my backup, my truth, my silent scream in case I didn't survive long enough to tell the world myself. I began documenting everything after that. The things Roy did when Mama wasn't home. The things he said in his sleep. The bruises on my arms I stopped bothering to hide. Mama saw them. She always saw them. But she chose her own peace over our pain. And I think that's what hurt most. That she knew. And still stayed. Years passed like that. Me, growing taller, angrier, colder. Him, getting fatter, drunker, crueler. Every birthday passed with Rose's absence like a knife in my gut. Until one day I turned 18. And I left. I left that cursed house. That cursed man. That cursed town. But I didn't forget. I took the notebook with me. I went to work at a diner. Paid my way through community college. Became a nurse. People thought I was strong. They had no idea. The trauma never left. I still heard her crying in my sleep. Still saw the leaves covering her body every time the wind blew through trees. Until one night, after 35 years of silence, I saw Roy again. In a hospital bed. Hooked to machines. Eyes yellowed from liver failure. I stood over him in my white uniform. Badge clipped to my chest. He didn't recognize me at first. "Water," he croaked. I poured him a glass and said, "Do you remember Rose?" His eyes widened. His lips trembled. He knew. He knew exactly who I was. But before he could speak, the machine started beeping. His chest rose and fell in violent jerks. And suddenly, he flatlined. Just like that. Gone before he could confess. Gone before justice could be served. Gone before I could make him pay. And you'd think that would have been the end. But it wasn't. Because death didn't erase what he did. It didn't return my sister. It didn't erase the silence of the people who protected him. Well, revenge was still alive in me. And I was about to unleash it. But not in the way anyone expected. It all started when I got the call from a lawyer about Roy's will. He left something behind. And it was the one thing I could use to destroy everyone who stood by and did nothing. If you believe every victim deserves justice, and that silence is never the answer, please like, comment, and subscribe. Chapter 3 will show you exactly how karma moves when we stop waiting. The lawyer's voice on the phone was steady but formal. "Are you Ms. Edna Collins?" "Yes," I replied, holding the receiver tightly to my ear. "I'm calling regarding the estate of Mr. Roy Lewis. He passed recently, and you've been named as a beneficiary in his will." I almost dropped the phone. "Excuse me." "Yes, ma'am. You've inherited a small farmhouse outside of town. And a safety deposit box." I hung up without saying goodbye. My knees gave way, and I sat down slowly on the floor of my apartment, shaking. Why would Roy leave me anything? Was it guilt? A final insult? Or was there something more? My hands trembled as I drove to the lawyer's office 2 days later. He handed me a key and an address. "There's also a sealed envelope." His instructions were very clear. "You're to open it only at the farmhouse." He nodded. And that's where it all truly began. The house was old, older than I remembered. The paint peeled off like shedding skin. Weeds wrapped around the porch like arms trying to drag it under. I stood in front of it, frozen. This was the same house where Rose laughed in the yard chasing butterflies, before it all turned dark. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The envelope was yellowed. My name scrawled in crooked, angry handwriting. Inside was one single page. "You win. Go ahead. Tell them what I did. This house is your prize. But the town will never believe you, asterisk." I sat there for hours staring at that note. Because Roy was right. Unless I made them believe me. And that's when I remembered the notebook. The one I buried in the crawlspace under the old house. It was still there. Wrapped in plastic. Muddy, damp but intact. Every entry, every drawing, every timestamp survived. It felt like Rose's voice whispering through the pages. But I needed more than memories. I needed proof that couldn't be ignored. I contacted the cold case unit anonymously. I told them where to look. And then I made a plan. Found old photos. Got in touch with former neighbors. And then I tracked down Mama. She was in a nursing home now. Frail. But when I walked in, she looked at me like she saw a ghost. "Edna," she whispered. "You found it, didn't you?" I pulled out the notebook and laid it gently in her lap. "Mama," I said softly, "you knew all along." She broke. Her body crumpled into sobs. "I was afraid. He said he'd kill all of us. I didn't know what to do. You didn't protect her." "I know." Her voice was hoarse. "But you can now. You can tell the truth." That same week, the detectives dug up the woods behind the farmhouse. And they found her. The bones. The dress. Even a piece of the doll's arm. It made the news. A local girl, Rose Collins, gone for over 60 years. Body recovered behind family home. The headlines didn't say abuse. Or murder. But they whispered it. And when I walked into the town hall meeting 3 days later, clutching my notebook, every face turned toward me. Old neighbors. School teachers. The same deacon who told me to pray harder. Took the mic. "I've waited my whole life to say this," I began. "My name is Edna Collins. And my stepfather, Roy Lewis, was a child abuser, a murderer, and a coward. You could have heard a pin drop. I told them everything. About the nights, the bruises, the grave, the silence. Some people cried. Some couldn't look at me. And some just sat still, guilt blooming on their faces. But the woman from the local paper stood up and asked, "Can I share your story?" "Yes," I said. "But I'm not the story. My sister is." The article went viral. And soon more people came forward. Women, girls, now grown. He had hurt others. And now they knew they weren't alone. But even after all that, I didn't feel finished. Because the town had buried my sister. And now they were going to remember her. I contacted the mayor's office. I gave them a copy of my notebook. Asked for one thing. A memorial. 4 rows. Plaque. Tree. Bench with her name. Something. They agreed. But the night before the unveiling, someone vandalized it. Spray-painted "Liar" across the concrete. I stood there staring at it, seething. Roy may have been dead. But his sickness still lingered in that town. And I wasn't done cleaning it out. Because one of the people who helped cover up his crimes still lived there. Still worked at the sheriff's office. Still smiled in pictures like nothing ever happened. And I had just found proof he knew all along. If you've ever carried a silent truth that the world refused to hear, this story is for you. Like, comment, and subscribe. Chapter 4 is where we go deeper. The cover-up is about to unravel. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of the spray paint, but because of the face behind it. Deputy Carl Hutchins. He used to come by the house when I was a child. Laughed with Roy over beers. Smoked on the porch while Mama sat silent in the kitchen. And once, when I was 11, I'd pulled Carl aside after church and whispered that Rose was scared of Roy. He bent down and looked me in the eyes. His breath sour with mint and smoke. "Don't say things you don't understand, Edna," he warned, then smoothed my hair like a pet. "You'll get your mama in trouble." Now here we were, nearly 70 years later. And that same man was still in uniform, wearing a badge that should have turned to dust the moment Rose's body was found. But God doesn't forget. And neither did I. I went to the courthouse the next day, wearing my nurse's uniform. It's funny how a uniform makes people treat you with respect even when you're just a girl from a broken home. I asked to see the sheriff. He was new, young, thoughtful, and trying to do better than those who came before him. When I told him I had something important to show him, he cleared his schedule. I opened my bag and laid the evidence out piece by piece. Old photos of Roy and Carl drinking on our porch. Pages from the notebook with Carl's name and the days he checked in after neighbors called about yelling. A school report showing I missed 3 straight weeks because of bruises. Then I played the audio. My phone shook in my hand as I tapped it. Mama's voice. Recorded at the nursing home. The conversation from weeks ago. "I told Carl," she'd said. "He said to let Roy handle it in-house. That we'd get in trouble with CPS if the girls were taken. Said Roy had friends who'd make sure we never saw them again." The sheriff's mouth tightened. His pen stopped moving. He looked up at me and said, "Can I keep this?" "You can," I said. "But if you bury it, I'll go straight to the news." Again. He nodded. "We'll investigate." But I wasn't about to sit around waiting. I wanted everyone to know the truth about Carl. So I wrote a letter. To the local paper. To the regional radio. Even to a young woman running a true crime podcast out of her garage. And soon the whispers became a roar. Former deputy linked to abuse cover-up. Did the town turn its back on 2 little girls? And then the calls came in. A woman from 2 towns over who remembered being pulled over by Carl as a teen, and how he offered to let her off if she just smiled pretty. A nurse who said she saw Carl bring Roy into the hospital more than once, bruised knuckles, angry, ranting about disobedient kids. The silence was finally cracking. But the worst part. When the sheriff came back to me a week later, holding a sealed manila folder. "We found something else." He handed me a photo. with Roy and Carl standing behind her. She looked scared. It was taken a year before she died. The folder held more photos. A scribbled map. Roy hadn't acted alone. Carl had helped him bury her. My vision blurred. My hands shook. "I want him arrested," I whispered. "We will," the sheriff said. "But there's more." He pulled out one final envelope. Typed letter. Dated just 2 years ago. Roy had written a confession. It was never mailed. But in it he wrote, "Carl helped me move her. He told me what to say. He got rid of the shovel. He said no one would believe Edna if she ever talked. Said girls like her don't get justice." My breath caught in my throat. It was all there. Not just the abuse. Not just the murder. But the cover-up. And the names. People who had sworn to protect us. People who let a monster walk free. Because he was one of them. I left the station that day with that folder like it was my baby sister's second heartbeat. And I made copies. Sent them to every journalist I could find. Every blog. Every news outlet. Every person who might care. And when the story broke, the town exploded. Protests outside City Hall. Demands for resignations. And finally, after 7 decades of waiting, an arrest. Carl Hutchins, 89, booked into county jail. Charged with conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and complicity in a child's murder. I stood outside the courtroom on the day of his arraignment. Dressed in black. Not for mourning but for war. He was wheeled in, old, gray, shaking, but I didn't feel pity. Because my sister never got the chance to grow old. And I still hadn't felt peace. When he saw me, he lowered his eyes. He knew what he'd done. And now the world knew too. But what no one knew, not yet, was that there were still more names. More people who helped hide what happened. And one of them was still working at the county archives. Still pulling files. Still deleting records. But I had just gotten a tip box. Left anonymously at the back door of my apartment. And inside was a letter. Handwritten. "Dear Edna, you don't know me. But I knew your sister. If you believe the truth always finds a way, even if it takes a lifetime, then stay with me. Like, comment, and subscribe." Chapter 5 reveals the letter that changes everything. You're not ready. The envelope was faded and smudged with rainwater. My name was written in soft, slanted cursive across the front, almost delicate, as if the writer was afraid the ink would scream too loudly. Inside was a folded piece of lined paper. The handwriting was shaky but clear. "Dear Edna, you don't know me. But I knew your sister. I was there the night she went missing. I didn't speak up. I should have. I was just a boy then. But I saw Roy and Carl that night. I saw them dragging something through the woods. I heard Rose scream. I was too scared to move. I was hiding in my grandfather's tool shed, watching through the slats. For 70 years I've carried this. And now that Carl's been arrested, maybe it's finally time. Please meet me. I want to show you where they really buried her the first time, before they moved her body later. There's more you need to know. Jonathan Brooks. 115 Tanner Road. I read it 3 times. My hands trembled. My chest rose and fell in short, anxious bursts. Jonathan Brooks. I didn't know the name, but I knew the road. It was near the old mill pond. Not far from where we used to play before Roy moved in. It was a part of the town that time seemed to forget. Just like Rose. I drove out early the next morning. It was foggy. Silent. Jonathan's house was small. Rusted gate. Faded blue paint. A porch swing that creaked when the wind touched it. He was already waiting. White hair. His hands trembled as he opened the door, but his eyes held something I hadn't seen in years in anyone from this town: shame. "I knew you'd come," he said, ushering me in. Inside, the house smelled like books and dust. On the kitchen table were maps, newspaper clippings, and an old photo of a group of kids. One of them was Rose. "I was her friend," Jonathan said softly. "We used to trade comic books under the bridge." He paused. Followed. "That night I saw them. Roy and Carl. I didn't know what was happening at first. But when I heard her scream, his voice cracked. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. They buried her near the fence line by the big oak. I saw them do it. But that's not where we found her, I said. He nodded slowly. No, I think they moved her days later, after people started asking questions. Carl knew the police would come snooping eventually. So they dug her up and took her deeper into the woods, closer to your property. But where they first buried her, that spot still has evidence. My breath caught in my throat. Evidence. I never went back, he said. Until last week. When I saw the article. That's when I found this. He slid a plastic bag across the table. Inside was a pink hair ribbon. Molded, faded, but still intact. My knees nearly buckled. Rose used to wear one just like it. Mama tied it herself every Sunday. I didn't touch anything else, Jonathan said. I wanted you to see it first. We drove to the spot. The oak tree stood like a guardian. Tall, wide, branches drooping like heavy arms. The earth was disturbed, just faintly. Grass growing awkward in patches. Jonathan pointed. They dug right there. I remember the shovel. Roy was yelling. Carl told him to shut up before someone hears. They were drunk. I crouched down and ran my fingers through the soil. Something glittered beneath the top layer. A metal snap button. I pulled it out carefully. Rusted but still recognizable. The back of a child's dress. The original grave. Jonathan looked away, covering his mouth with a shaking hand. I should have done something. I was just a kid. But I should have told. You're telling now, I whispered. We took the items to the sheriff. He called in the forensics team again. More was found. Tiny teeth. Fragments of cloth. Enough to confirm Jonathan's story. Enough to reopen the case under a new charge, tampering with a crime scene. But that wasn't even the most shocking part. That night, the sheriff called me personally. Edna, he said, his voice tight. We found a file buried in the archives. Someone tried to delete it from the system. But it's printed and logged. What is it? Yes. A CPS report. From 1955. My blood turned to ice. He continued. It was filed by a nurse at the hospital. She treated Rose after Roy accidentally shut her hand in a door. The report said the injuries didn't match the story. I sat down silent. But here's the thing, Carl signed off on the report. And marked it as a non-emergency. Said it didn't require follow-up. There it was again. Carl. Always Carl. Gatekeeping justice. Burying the truth. The sheriff cleared his throat. I also found something else. The woman who filed that report. Her name was Margaret Beck. She died a year later. In a house fire. That was never fully investigated. I didn't speak. Couldn't. Because something deeper was starting to crawl into my chest. What if this cover-up had gone even further than we thought? What if Roy and Carl weren't just two terrible men? What if others helped keep them hidden? What if Rose's murder was only one part of something far darker? Something that cost more than one innocent life. I hung up the phone and stared out the window into the fog. The ribbon sat on my table, next to my teacup. My baby sister's ribbon. I thought I had found closure. But now, I'd only opened a deeper wound. Because Margaret Beck didn't just file that report. She had written a note before she died. And according to the sheriff, it was never delivered. Till now. Are you starting to feel it too? That the truth may be bigger, deeper, and more dangerous than we ever thought. Like, comment, and subscribe. Next chapter uncovers the nurse's final letter. And it changes everything. The letter arrived in a small envelope, brittle and browned at the edges like it had been sleeping under something heavy for decades. The sheriff delivered it to me personally. I found it taped to the inside of the report folder, he said. It was sealed. Addressed to someone named Lillian May. But never mailed. Lillian May was Margaret Beck's best friend. A fellow nurse. The sheriff cleared his throat. We reached out. She passed away in 1980. No children. He placed the letter in my hands. You're the only living witness now, Edna. You deserve to read it. I stared at the envelope for hours before I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in hurried loops. Lillian, I think I'm in danger. I reported the injuries on that little girl, Rose. Followed protocol, but something felt wrong. The bruises didn't match the story her stepfather gave. And she wouldn't speak. She just sat there, trembling, clinging to her sister's hand. I've seen too many cases like this, but what scared me wasn't the injuries. It was the man who came afterward. Deputy Carl Hutchins. He walked into my office without knocking. Said I misread what I saw. Told me the town takes care of its own. I told him I wouldn't back down. That was yesterday. Tonight I found my front door open. Nothing stolen. Just moved. Lillian, if something happens to me, promise me someone will tell the truth. I think this goes higher than Roy Lewis. I think some of the men in town are protecting each other. Please, if I don't come into work tomorrow, don't let this die with me. Margaret. I couldn't breathe. The words echoed through me like a scream I'd been holding in my whole life. Rose hadn't just been killed. She'd been erased, silenced, buried under the weight of a town that chose complicity over truth. And now Margaret, who tried to help, had likely paid the price with her life. I sat in silence for hours, listening to the wind rattle my windows, wondering how many other names were out there, how many other files, how many children. And then, got an idea. The archive building. That's where Carl worked for years after he retired from active duty. He volunteered, they said. Helped organize the past. What if he didn't just bury files in the woods? What if he was still erasing people? Quietly from the inside. I grabbed my flashlight and my courage and drove to the records building. The clerk was a kid in his 20s. Didn't even ask me for ID. Basement's open, he said, barely looking up from his phone. Just don't mess with the water heater. I descended into the archives. Smelled like mold and metal. Rows of shelves. Boxes stacked high, organized alphabetically. But there was one door in the back, marked restricted. I stared at it, then glanced at the nearby desk. An old key ring sat carelessly in a drawer. I tried them one by one. Click. The door creaked open. Inside was a small room. Dusty, tight, windowless. But on the far wall was a cabinet. And in that cabinet were files. Labeled, discarded cases. The first one I opened. Rose Collins. 1955. CPS. Stamped revoked. The second. Margaret Beck. Suspicious incident. House fire. No follow-up. No photos. No witness reports. Dozens more. Dates from the 1940s to the 1980s. Girls. Nurses. Teachers. Every single one silenced. I started taking pictures with my phone. My hands were shaking, breath coming fast. Until I heard footsteps. Above me. Then down the stairs. Killed my flashlight. Held my breath. A figure appeared in the doorway. He shuffled into the basement like he belonged there. The janitor. It was Harold Myers. The retired judge. Still carried weight in this town. And on the shelf behind him he placed another box, then looked around, muttering. "Damn kids don't follow instructions," he said aloud, not knowing I was there. He opened the cabinet. Started flipping through files like he'd done it 1,000 times. Then he pulled one out, stamped it, and slipped it into his coat. That's when I took the photo. Flash on. The room lit up like a lightning strike. He froze, turned around slowly, his face red with panic. "Who's there?" Ran. Out of the archives. Out of the building. Into the night. He didn't chase me. But I had what I needed. Photo. File. His face. I emailed everything to the sheriff before I even made it home. The next morning the news broke. Retired Judge Harold Myers under investigation for tampering with town records. And I I wasn't hiding anymore. They tried to bury my sister. They tried to silence Margaret. They tried to scare me. But now the truth was louder than their secrets. Still, I knew this wasn't over. Because a week later, a note appeared on my porch. Just 5 words, scrawled in ink. You should have stayed quiet, Edna. They tried to warn her. But the storm is already here. Like, comment, and subscribe. Next chapter will show you just how far the past is willing to go to protect itself. Don't miss it. The note chilled me more than the wind. You should have stayed quiet, Edna. No envelope. No signature. Just those 5 words, written in bold, slanted strokes and tucked neatly under my front door mat. I held it in my hands for hours, sitting in my living room, staring at the last word like it had claws. Quiet. They wanted me quiet. Just like Rose. Just like Margaret. Just like all the names buried in that archive room. But I was done being afraid. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. That night I locked every window, pulled every curtain shut, sat by the front door with my old walking cane gripped like a weapon. I didn't sleep. And in the morning, there was another note, taped to my car windshield this time. There's more to lose than truth. Keep digging and you'll bury yourself next. This time I called the sheriff. He promised a patrol. He promised to look into camera footage. He promised protection. But I had learned the hard way. Promises don't stop men like Roy. Or Carl. Or Harold. They just delay them. So I made a call of my own. To the podcast host who had first covered Rose's case. Her name was Natalie Cruz. Mid-30s. Fierce, relentless, and born with a radar for injustice. I have more, I told her. Much more. By that afternoon, she was in my living room with 2 microphones, a recorder, and a box of coffee. You ready to tell the world? She asked. He nodded. And I began. Everything. From Roy. To the shotgun. To the ribbon. To the archive. To the old judge. To the new threats. Natalie listened in silence, only breaking to ask for clarity. And when we were done, she said something I didn't expect. Edna, you're not alone anymore. She released the episode within 48 hours. And it exploded. 500,000 downloads in 3 days. National headlines followed. The town was under a microscope now. But with attention came backlash. Someone broke into Natalie's car and slashed her tires. Someone followed me home from the grocery store. And then, they escalated. My front window shattered in the middle of the night. A brick came flying in, wrapped in a red rag. It said, "Stop digging graves you can't climb out of." But they didn't understand. I'd lived my whole life in the grave they dug for Rose. I wasn't climbing out. I was burning it down. So I went public. Press conference. Cameras. Reporters. Lights. I brought the notebook. I brought the ribbon. I brought the letter from Margaret. I read it aloud. Then I held up the photo of Harold Myers in the archives room. Caught red-handed. Said names. Loud. On record. Carl Hutchins. Judge Harold Myers. Sheriff Bill Toller from 1955. The CPS director who signed off on the revoked case. I am 84 years old, I said to the crowd. I have no fear left. Only the truth. And this town has buried it for too long. Years. Anger. And someone in the back, wearing sunglasses and a cap, quietly walked away. Natalie turned to me. Who was that? I didn't know. But the sheriff did. He called me the next morning, voice tight. Edna. We think someone in our department is leaking information. What kind of information? Your address. Your case files. Even internal memos. My stomach dropped. You have a mole, I whispered. He didn't answer. Hung up. But still. Then I remembered something. A name from Rose's school papers. A janitor who used to give her extra snacks. She wrote his name once, in purple crayon, in the corner of one of my notebook pages. Mr. Pete is nice. I hadn't thought about him in decades. But curiosity sparked. What if he was still alive? I dug through online records. nursing home registries. And I found him. Peter Langston, 97 years old, living 2 towns over. Got in my car. I drove. He remembered Rose. She had a laugh that tickled your ears, he said, eyes twinkling. I told him what happened, what we'd found. He grew quiet. Then he leaned forward. I always suspected something, he said. I saw Roy slap her once behind the gym. I told Principal Fletcher. My heart skipped. Principal Fletcher. He nodded. But he told me to stay out of it. Said it was handled. I whispered. He's still alive, isn't he? Mr. Pete nodded. He's got Alzheimer's now. In a facility. But they say he talks in his sleep. Says things about little girls and bad secrets. I left that day with a name and a new thread to pull. The facility was clean, quiet. I asked to speak with the staff about Mr. Fletcher. One nurse leaned in close and said, he mumbles a lot about a file. Something hidden. Something in the school basement. My blood ran cold. The school. The one that had long been shut down after an asbestos warning in the 90s. I went back the next day. Snuck in through a broken window. The air was thick with dust and silence. I walked the halls, heart pounding, until I found the basement door. And behind a panel in the wall. Metal box. Inside. Photos. Handwritten notes. Signed witness statements. Second notebook. Not mine. But Rose's. Diary. Tiny, careful handwriting. If I go missing, I hope Edna reads this. I hope she tells the truth. I hope someone believes her. I collapsed to the ground, sobbing. Because even in fear, she had hoped for me. She believed in me. I took that diary straight to Natalie. We recorded a second episode. The world heard Rose's words. And for the first time in 70 years, people listened. But that night, just before I drifted off to sleep, my phone buzzed. Text. No name. Just words. Too late, Edna. The last piece is gone. If you've followed this far, then you know, this isn't just a story. It's a reckoning. Like, comment, and subscribe. Next chapter will bring the final truth. And it might be the most painful one yet. Don't miss it. The message stared back at me in the dark. Too late, Edna. The last piece is gone. I sat up in bed, heart hammering. What did they mean? What piece? I dialed the sheriff immediately. He answered on the third ring, voice groggy. Edna. I just got a message, I snapped. They said the last piece is gone. What's missing? There was a long silence. The fire. Edna. There was a fire. My blood froze. What fire? The old county records annex. Someone set it ablaze early this morning. Security cameras were disabled. Files destroyed. Everything from 1940 to 1970. Gone. Just like that. Decades of cases. Proof. Erased in flames. Any casualties? I whispered. No, he said. But that was the point, wasn't it? They weren't trying to hurt anyone. Just the truth. The truth. Always the target. Hung up. And for the first time in this entire fight, I felt the weight of real fear settle in my chest. They were still out there. Still watching. Still trying to silence Rose. And now, her diary might be the last record left. I clutched it like a fragile heartbeat and drove to Natalie's studio. She looked up from her desk, face pale. I saw the news, she said. They're covering their tracks. I handed her the diary. Scan it. Back it up. Email it to 10 people. Hide it in the cloud. Whatever you have to do. She nodded, already typing. We released the third and final podcast episode that night. Rose's Voice, it was called. Natalie read aloud each of Rose's final entries. Roy said if I told anyone, he'd make Edna disappear too. Carl said girls like us lie for attention. I heard them talking to someone on the phone. I think they're planning something bad. If anything happens to me, tell Edna I love her. The internet erupted. People from around the world began using the hashtag #JusticeForRose. Survivors reached out. Former townsfolk who had moved away started naming names. And then, the miracle happened. A former CPS worker, now in her 90s, came forward. She had kept copies of several reports from the 50s and 60s. She feared they would be misplaced, and she'd hidden them in a storage box in her attic. She mailed them to Natalie. And in those yellowing pages we found it. A copy of the original, unedited report about Rose's injuries. Notes from a hospital social worker, flagged as urgent. A follow-up request, signed and then scratched out by Carl Hutchins. The final piece. The one they tried to burn. But truth like fire spreads. And it was spreading fast. The state launched a formal investigation into the county's Child Protective Services history. Retired officials were subpoenaed. Carl's trial date was expedited. Judge Harold Meyer's assets were frozen. And the school, where Rose's diary had been hidden, was designated a historical crime site. But none of it brought my sister back. I stood at her memorial that summer, staring at the new plaque the town had finally agreed to install. In memory of Rose Collins, 1946 to 1955. She was never just a girl. She was a light they couldn't bury. I placed a new ribbon there. The same shade of pink she used to wear on Sundays. And for the first time in 70 years, cried. Not the silent, buried tears of a girl trying to survive, but the loud, breaking sobs of a woman who finally was being heard. Natalie walked up beside me. There's something I need to tell you. I wiped my face. What? We got an anonymous submission this morning. No name, but it had this inside. She handed me a flash drive. I plugged it into her laptop. It was a video. Grainy. Black and white. But clear enough. It showed Roy and Carl, in 1955, standing in front of a truck, loading something into the back. Tarp. Heavy. Long. Carl looked directly at the camera once, then turned away. There was no timestamp, no location. But the file name said everything. They lied. I watched. Someone else had been there. Someone we still didn't know. But now they were ready to speak. Natalie looked at me, her voice hushed. Are you going to keep going? He nodded. Rose didn't die for nothing, I said. And I didn't survive all these years just to be quiet. I went home that night exhausted but lighter. And for the first time in my life, I slept without locking the windows. In my dream, Rose stood at the edge of the woods, smiling. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. But when I woke up I felt something strange. Not because the world was fixed. If this story moved you, shook you, or reminded you that silence protects no one, please like, comment and subscribe. Justice isn't always fast. But it's always worth fighting for. And sometimes, even 70 years later, the truth still wins. The morning after the text, I didn't get out of bed right away. I laid there, staring at the ceiling, trying to slow the storm building in my chest. Too late, Edna. The last piece is gone. That message haunted me all night. But I had learned something over these long, painful years. Fear was not a sign to stop. It was a warning that I was getting close. I got dressed slowly, pinned Rose's ribbon to my coat, and then I opened my front door. Dead bird. Left neatly on my porch, its neck twisted, its wings spread. Tied to its claw was another note. You should have died with her. My hands trembled, but I didn't flinch. I picked it up, walked inside and placed it on the table. Natalie came over an hour later. She didn't say a word when I showed it to her. Just opened her laptop and started typing. Are you scared? She asked finally. Of course, I said. But I'm more scared of what happens if we stop now. The press was already outside. Parked vans. Booms on sticks. People waiting for a quote, a breakdown, a headline. Gave them one. I stepped onto my porch with Rose's diary in hand and held it up. They're trying to scare me. Again. But let me be clear, they failed then. And they're failing now. I will not be silenced. The next day a package arrived with no return address. Inside, a VHS tape. No label. I hadn't touched a VCR in years, but Natalie still had one. We played the tape together. What we saw stopped our breath cold. Black and white footage. Silent. Flickering. It showed the inside of a courtroom. Roy Lewis, younger, in a suit. Carl Hutchins in uniform, sitting behind him. The date in the corner read January 1955. Roy was on trial. That alone stunned us. We never knew he was ever arrested, ever held accountable at all. A judge sat at the bench. Judge Harold Myers. But what shocked us more, Roy wasn't on trial for child abuse. He was on trial for assaulting a white man at a bar. Not a single mention of Rose, of me, of anything that happened in our home. But in the middle of the tape, a woman stands to testify. My heart leapt. It was Margaret Beck. I submitted a report about this man's treatment of his stepchildren, she said, voice shaking. The injuries. Trauma. I filed it with CPS and the sheriff's office. The judge interrupted her. That is not relevant to this case. But someone needs to hear it, she cried. These girls are in danger. The tape cut to static. Gasp. Natalie slammed her hand on the table. They cut it, she whispered. The rest of the tape, someone erased it. But even those few minutes were enough. Proof that Margaret tried. Proof the system silenced her, in public. Natalie uploaded the clip that same night. Spread like wildfire. Another hashtag began trending. Hashtag Margaret tried. People were furious. And just like that, the case expanded again. The DA's office called. We want you to testify, Edna, they said. Against Roy. Yes. Against everyone. There's enough evidence now for a grand jury investigation. They wanted me to go back to that courtroom. To speak where I was once silenced. To stand in the same room where Margaret had cried for us, and been shut down. Said yes. The day I entered the courthouse, my cane clicked loudly against the tile. People watched. Some smiled. Some looked away. Carl was wheeled in, wrists cuffed to the sides of his chair. He didn't look at me. Harold wasn't there. He had fled the state. But the case was going forward without him. The court clerk called my name. I walked to the stand, sat down, looked at the judge, and spoke. My name is Edna Collins. I'm 84 years old. And I'm here today for my sister Rose. For Margaret Beck. For every girl this town tried to bury, alongside the truth. Told everything. The nights, the shotgun, the grave, the ribbon, the diary, tape. By the time I finished, the courtroom was silent. Tears in the eyes of strangers. Gasps from reporters. Even the judge looked shaken. But what happened next? That's what I'll never forget. A man stood from the back row. Mid-60s. Gray beard. Heavy eyes. My name is Richard Simmons, he said aloud. I worked in CPS in the 80s. I found files that didn't make sense. Names that disappeared. I tried to report it. And I was fired. Another voice from the gallery. I'm Deborah. My aunt was a teacher in the 50s. She told me about a girl named Rose. Said something bad happened but the school shut it down. One by one they stood. And the judge. He didn't stop them. It was like the truth had finally found air. And it was breathing fire. The hearing was adjourned with a unanimous ruling. The investigation would proceed as a formal inquiry into systemic abuse and cover-up. But even with that victory I felt something shift in me. Because that night, I received one final message. Letter. No return address. Edna, you've opened the door. But there's still one more truth you haven't uncovered. Ask yourself this. Who kept the camera rolling in that courtroom? Who leaked the footage? And why now? A friend. I stared at it for hours. 'Cause they were right. That footage had to come from someone on the inside. Someone who had access. Someone who waited until now to show me. But why? Why wait 70 years? And why now? Unless there was still one more piece of the puzzle missing. And that final piece might not be about Roy, or Carl, or even Harold. It might be about someone very close to me. And I was just about to find out who. If you felt the weight of this story, if your heart aches for justice, for answers, for truth, then like, comment, and subscribe. Next chapter is the final chapter. And it will reveal the secret that changes everything. I sat with the letter for days. Couldn't throw it away. Couldn't ignore it. The words crawled under my skin. Who kept the camera rolling? Who leaked the footage? Why now? For all the screaming I had done, for all the silence I had broken, someone else had been watching too. Not the cowards who buried files. Not the monsters who abused their power. But a ghost in the machine. Someone had waited for this moment. And I needed to know who. Natalie had been out of town for 2 days, attending a journalism conference. I asked her to dig deeper into the court footage once she got back. But I couldn't wait. I drove back to the courthouse myself, walking slowly down the same halls where I had once sat trembling as a child. I asked to see the records archivist. The woman at the counter blinked at me. "We don't have an archivist anymore," she said. Then who was in charge of court documentation in the 1950s? Her fingers tapped the keyboard. Judge's clerk, Harold Myers, and a junior intern. Name was listed as Jacob Henry. The name hit me like a slap. Jacob Henry. That was Mama's cousin. He used to visit when I was little. Quiet, gentle, always gave Rose candy. I hadn't seen him since I left town. Everyone said he moved away. Disappeared. I asked for his last known address. The clerk scribbled it down. It was barely 40 minutes outside of town, near an old fishing village. I drove in silence. The house was small, almost leaning, with ivy crawling up the side and wind chimes whispering in the breeze. I knocked once. No answer. Still nothing. But when I turned to leave, the door creaked open. An old man with a long beard and watery blue eyes looked out at me. "Edna," he rasped. "I knew you'd come." "Jacob," I whispered. He nodded. "I was waiting for you." I stepped inside. His living room was filled with dusty books, old tapes, file boxes, and photos pinned to cork boards. Like a museum of guilt. "You filmed that courtroom," I said. "I did," he replied. "I was the intern. They told me to cut the tape when Margaret got emotional. But I didn't. Kept it running. I kept the reel. Why didn't you come forward?" He looked away. "Because I was scared. Because I didn't think anyone would listen to a 20-year-old. Because they threatened me." He pointed to a faded scar on his arm. "Roy did this. Found out I kept the footage. I said I'd destroyed it. I lied." My voice cracked. "Why didn't you help us?" He turned, eyes full of tears. "I tried, Edna. I really did. But I failed you. I failed her." He handed me a thick folder. Inside were photos, transcripts, more letters, all documenting what had happened over the years. Secret archive. "My life's work," he said softly. "I kept everything, waiting for someone to make noise. When I saw you on TV, I knew it was time." I stayed with him for hours, listening, asking, learning. And what I learned chilled me to the bone. Because Roy and Carl weren't the only ones who hurt Rose. There had been others. A small, hidden group of men in the 1950s and 60s. Teachers, businessmen, even law enforcement. Who passed girls like Rose around like property. A ring. And Harold Myers wasn't just covering up for Roy. He was part of it. Jacob had proof. Even a list of locations. One of them was the old gym locker room at our school. Another. The basement of the church where we held Rose's funeral. I left his house that night with a box in my trunk and fire in my chest. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about redemption. For every girl they passed over. For every boy they threatened into silence. For every whistleblower who got burned alive in her home. For Margaret. For Rose. I called Natalie on my way back. "We have more," I said. She met me the next morning. We went through everything. And then we published it all. Special episode. A website. A downloadable archive. We named it The Rose Files. It went global. News anchors sobbed reading Rose's diary. Survivors wrote in from all over the country. It happened in our town too. Your story gave me courage. I was Rose once. The governor called me personally. The Department of Justice launched a national investigation into forgotten abuse cases from 1940 to 1980. A federal bill was proposed to mandate digitization of all historical child protection records. They called it the Rose Act. But all of that, none of it compared to what happened one morning when I opened my door and found a teenage girl standing on my porch. She had a backpack, a scar on her neck, and shaking hands. "Are you Edna Collins?" she asked. "I am." She burst into tears. "I ran away from someone. He said no one would believe me. But I heard your story." I pulled her into my arms. And in that moment I realized something. They tried to silence me with fear. They tried to destroy me with grief. But what they didn't understand was that grief can grow roots. And silence can bloom into a voice so loud the world trembles. I didn't just fight for Rose. I became a lighthouse for every lost child in the storm. And now, I wasn't afraid of the dark anymore, because I had become the light. If this story touched your soul, reminded you of the power of truth, and gave voice to the silenced, please like, comment, and subscribe. Justice may be slow, but it is inevitable. And stories like Rose's must never be forgotten.